This week's episode is supported by Investec Wealth and Investment UK. Are you one of millions being dragged into paying more tax? Will inflation deflate your future lifestyle? Know where life can take you with Investec Wealth and Investment UK. They can make sure you're making the most of all your allowances and reliefs with tailored solutions designed to make your money grow and a plan to help you pass it on. It pays to get advice. Discover how you can achieve financial freedom faster. Search Investec Wealth and Investment UK. It's important to remember with investments that your capital is at risk.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
It's the week ending Saturday the 27th of January, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Russia accusing Ukraine of shooting down a military transport plane being used for a prisoner exchange, Ron DeSantis dropping out of the race to be Republican nominee for president, and gusts as high as 107 miles per hour as Storm Isha battered Scotland. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Julia O'Driscoll from BBC Sport, journalist Emma Smith, and it's the book reviews editor for the International Affairs Journal, Mariana Vieira, who is up first this week. Mariana, what do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is Finland the stronghold of centrist politics in Europe?
We've moved from a world of relative order to a world of disorder, and it'll probably take about 10 years for this order to settle. I personally think, as a political scientist or someone who studies international relations very closely, that this is the 1918, 1945 or 1989 moment of our generation, when something big happens, but we don't know exactly where it's going to settle yet.
Alexander Stubb, in his YouTube lecture series Geopolitics with Alex at the end of last year. Mariana, who's he?
So Alexander Stubb is the former Prime Minister of Finland, and he is running for the presidential election as the centre-right National Coalition Party candidate. Okay,
so Finland has a president as head of state, but they also have a prime minister as well.
Yes, that is correct. Curiously, the Finnish president is the one who is directly responsible for the defense and foreign policy of the country, as stipulated in their constitution. And so they have specific roles and responsibilities that are just exclusive to them, such as declaring war and peace, addressing the UN, and meeting with the other foreign leaders.
And Emma, this is a man who quit politics and has now re-entered the ring. Why?
Yeah, so he served as Prime Minister between 2014 and 2015, but then quit politics in 2017 to enter the world of banking. He was Vice President of the European Investment Bank, but he's re-entered the race, re-entered politics amid a very interesting time for Finland. It's a time in which centrist and centre-to-left politics is the dominant sort of political leaning among the front runners, including himself. And it also comes at a time where Finland is caught between its position as a European nation and also its proximity to Russia. And it's through a variety of factors, is starting to lean more towards Europe than it is towards its neighbours to the east.
Yeah, the sense that I get, Julia, is it's kind of all hands on deck now, because of what's been going on with Russia-Ukraine. And Finland obviously has the largest land border in Europe with Russia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw Stubb said in an interview when he was asked specifically why he had decided now was the time, that he said that when the fatherland calls, you go. And so there is just this real feeling of heightening tensions between Finland and Russia. And obviously since Finland became a NATO member in April last year, that has then made the proximity of the country to Russia, and as you were saying, the longest border in Europe that it now joins, it's really increased the level of tension that's there, as well as well, not quite direct, what I have read as veiled threats from Putin. So he gave an interview on state television in December last year where he said that there will be problems with Finland, and he accused NATO members of dragging the country into the alliance. So it's understandable that there is this real feeling that candidates' position on Russia is going to shape this election.
But Mariana, Stubbs' position on Russia used to be one of increased ties and cooperation.
That is correct. So Stubb, in his previous ministerial positions, actively promoted economic cooperation with Russia, even after the occupation of Crimea in 2014. He also supported the Nord Stream 2, the Russian nuclear power plant project in Finland, and visa freedom for the Russians. So he used to strongly believe and defend the benefits of being interconnected or increased interconnectivity between Russia and Europe. And actually, it was when he was in government that Finland cut his defense budget by about 10%, so between 2011 and 2015.
So is that not proving an obstacle for him? He's the favourite, isn't he? And yet you'd think maybe people would be pointing this out. You know, this whole thing's about our relationship with Russia. You used to believe in being closer to them.
So actually, there's been quite a bit of a commentary about his campaign for president. So he's actually was part of 2 different presidential elections or races before, and he lost both times. And they say that part of his success this time around has to do with his demeanor, in the way that he's coming across as much more personable. He's having sort of 10 events per day. This looks like this sort of marathon. So I think part of it is the effort that he's having to engage with the population, but also there isn't so much as a contradiction in his current position towards Russia. It has very much evolved with the times, and I think even among the other candidates, everyone has sort of a strong line towards Russia in terms of remaining more independent and emphasizing European strategic autonomy especially.
Yeah, and also, Emma, it seems like his strategy on the campaign trail has been to come across as calm, moderate, centrist, reasonable. And this is a country that has some fairly extreme right-wingers in its coalition government.
Yes. So for the last 12 years, Finland has had the same president, the incumbent Sauli Niinisto, who's led a more conservative coalition. He's leaving office as he served reached his 2-term limit to 6-year terms. And I think that there is a conscious want to move back towards the centre from the Finnish people based on the opinion polls that we're seeing, which have Stubb as the leader company on 24% of the most recent opinion polls. Second with 21% is the Green Party centre-left candidate Pekka Haavisto. It does seem in Finland that there is a desire to move away from the right wing, partly because, after 12 years, to an extent, as we're seeing to an extent in the UK, there is a desire for, after a certain amount of time, people want a change in government, a change in direction. And I think also because there very much it does seem to be in Finland a desire to distance itself from Russia. The country, it's a leading provider of armaments and training to Ukraine. It has very much placed its flag on the Ukraine side of things. And I think that a move to a more centrist, less right-wing position is going to continue to put distance between itself and Russia.
And do you think this is of more relevance to the rest of the world, frankly, Julia, than it used to be now that Finland's in NATO?
Yeah, absolutely. I think NATO members are going to be paying really close attention to what happens now, especially because the president will oversee, he's commander-in-chief, he'll oversee the entire country's defence strategy as well. And it's also an election that's being watched by members of the European Parliament. There's obviously a succession of elections taking place across the world. It's election year, as some people are calling it.
I'd noticed.
And people are saying that this could be an indicator for other countries, particularly in Europe, of which way the following elections could go.
How so?
So I saw a new report by the European Council on Foreign Relations has warned that populist anti-EU parties are projected to do particularly well in the European parliamentary elections this year. There isn't necessarily a contender like that in this case, but I think this is the start of potentially more of a political momentum across Europe that could then set the stage for whether there's a shift towards more towards the centre-right or more towards the liberal side if Stubbs is beaten.
Do you see it that way as well, Mariana?
I think it's one of the things Julie was saying. I also read about it in terms of how this election in Finland is meant to be a way to gauge the mood for the European parliamentary elections in June later this year. But also I was reading this Forbes piece, which I thought was really interesting, that talks about the elections going on in Europe this year and late last year as the rise of quote-unquote mongrel political parties. So they were specifically talking about the Alliance for Justice and Reason in Germany and the new Social Contract Party in the Netherlands. And these parties are specifically have this very curious mix of characteristics where they have left-wing economic policies and tougher stance on migration, and so emphasizing certain values. And you can see this, so even though you don't see it at play in the presidential election in Finland, you can see it in that Finland and another 4 Nordic countries have recently signed a new cooperation agreement to sort of crowdfund measures there are to restrict immigration in their countries. So the general trends do very much seem to be there.
Okay, so if I was to push you on some crystal ball gazing, Mariana, is he going to win the first round and become president? And what are the chances of Russia and Finland actually having a war?
Okay, so on the first part, for anyone to win the first round of elections, they need 50% of the votes. Stubb has predicted or is anticipated to have 24% of the vote at the time. So it's most likely that the election will go to a runoff between the two front runners. And so in this case, I think right now there's 9 candidates, but when it becomes just the other 2 in the runoffs, I think it's very likely that he has a very strong case. And it seems like he's sort of leaving politics and coming back as like the story has resonated and made him quite popular. On the Russia war front, so no one wants to predict a war with Russia. Lots of people who didn't want to predict a war in Russia were very surprised in 2022. Instead of trying to put some new batteries into my crystal ball, I would just say that there have been 3 different predictions made by countries around Finland recently. So the German Council on Foreign Relations predicts that NATO has 5 to 10 years to prepare for a Russian attack, whereas the Polish security chief has brought this estimate down to only 3 years. And I think just earlier this month, Estonia's prime minister said that Europe needed to get ready for a potential war with Russia within 3 years. So at this point, I would say place your bets, but don't exclusively bet on not having something happen or on peace, let's say.
Okay, a sobering thought. Julia, you're up next after this. This week's episode is supported by Investec Wealth and Investment UK. Are you one of millions being dragged into paying more tax? Will inflation deflate your future lifestyle? Know where life can take you with Investec Wealth and Investment UK. They can make sure you're making the most of all your allowances and reliefs with tailored solutions designed to make your money grow and a plan to help you pass it on. It pays to get advice. Discover how you can achieve financial freedom faster. Search Investec Wealth and Investment UK. It's important to remember with investments that your capital is at risk.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
Okay, Julia, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
It's university like you've never seen it before.
I can't believe I'm actually speaking to you now live in LA.
I'm actually not a hologram. I'm really in this thing. Let me out. We wanted to go from the boardroom and the conference room into the living room. You know, you shouldn't have to be a millionaire or celebrity or even a digital resurrection of a late legend. This should be so, Grandpa and Timmy can communicate whether they're 10 miles away or 10,000 miles away.
You're looking a lot smaller than I recall.
When a volumetric, real-size person, even shrunk down into a tabletop-sized version of a person, materializes into a space, there's just a much more emotional connection that just doesn't exist when you're just chest up on a flat 2D display. This is sort of like if Zoom and being there had a baby.
Proto-M founder David Nussbaum talking to the BBC in 2022 as a hologram Julia, what has his exciting technology been up to this week?
So Loughborough University has announced that it is going to become the first higher education institute in Europe to introduce hologram technology onto its curriculum. So they'll be working with Proto to beam in guest lecturers and guest speakers for their students.
Why?
That's a great question. The Guardian piece that I was reading that brought this to my attention, I thought was really, it just started very well of everyone knows it's an uphill struggle to get hungover freshers into the lecture hall. And actually, I spoke to a friend who's a professor this week who was saying that she had a Monday morning lecture that used to have about 80 students attend and 10 people turned up. And some people watch online now, some people will watch back, just post-pandemic world, higher education having moved into a much more hybrid model. But universities are obviously keen to get people back into the lecture theatre, and I think also to show their students that they can really offer something unique, like a really unique offering, and particularly when they're thinking more about getting value for money for their degrees.
Well, this is it, isn't it, Emma? Is this just marketing fluff, really? Because, no disrespect to Loughborough University, but, this isn't Oxford or Cambridge, is it, telling us about their hologram lectures? It's Loughborough, and they're trying to attract students to spend their money there.
Yes, there is certainly that element, and it's notable that they were talking about in the pieces that the lecturers in for sports science lectures, Loughborough being a university most known for its sporting prowess rather than its academic prowess. So it's not surprising that this is what it's focused on. But obviously there is a certain amount of advertorial elements to it for Proto, the company behind this. But there is also an element in which universities are attempting to move with the times when it comes to providing services for students. So obviously, as Julie says, they've moved towards a more hybrid model with lectures online, but obviously in that regard trying to sort of engage students with lectures over Zoom, basically like just watching on TV in their bedrooms or whatever. It's difficult to engage students in that way. So any way of sort of bringing more students into the lecture hall, getting students more engaged, more interested in their lectures from a university perspective could only be a good thing.
Julia, how does the technology actually work? Do you need a special setup at the transmitting end?
Yes, so you have to be in a specific kind of pod, and then you have to have the relevant kind of device on the other side. So this is fairly expensive, and actually the cost of hologram technology has often been a massive obstacle to why it's not been better taken up. I didn't realise that this kind of technology was first invented in 1948, so it has been around for a really long time. But just the cost of all the equipment that's involved to make it happen has been a real hindrance. And so one thing that Proto is actually really pushing for is to try and lower the costs and looking at different ways of doing that. And one way, which I don't think is how it would be used in a university setting, but is looking at more whether it's possible to have smaller portable devices so that you could I'm imagining something the size of your phone almost, where you could be at home and beam someone into your living room maybe.
Yes, but that's beaming them in. But if you're the person recording, this is why I was thinking about this, Mariana. If you were asked to do a lecture, it's one thing, isn't it, to do it over Zoom. We've all got used to the idea of being filmed whilst we're talking. We're doing it now. But to stand in a special photographic, well-lit, three-dimensional environment and talk as if you're talking to a room full of students, it's quite daunting. And I think most academics, frankly, wouldn't be able to handle something that showbiz.
I understand what you're saying. I was looking at this... they have the Consumer Electronics Show. So they have this annual exhibition. The last one just happened 2 weeks ago. And they had someone actually use this hologram model. And you can tell that in terms of the interactive element, there was a very, very big delay. And there's this feeling of almost being human, but not quite. That leaves you a bit put off. And the person that was on the hologram, so he was the CEO of HoloConnects. And he was saying that he had to be standing with a white background behind him. And quite frankly, even with the sound clip that we just played, it looks like people are inside Barbie boxes and you're just sort of speaking to a new model. And the sort of news that I was reading about the electronics show, the headline was sort of like, soon you may be able to upgrade your video calls with life-size holograms of your colleagues. And I suddenly just thought, who would want a full team call with all your colleagues full-size inside your own in your home office? It just seemed like not the right, why would you need that and why would you want it? And I sort of feel like if the technology, like Julie was saying, has been around for over 50 years, I think there's sort of different ways you can apply it that are slightly more exciting or more promising than sort of having your whole team sitting in your living room casually with their hologram feet over your dog or something.
Well, that's it. It could actually be quite intimidating, couldn't it, Emma? You know, the thing about seeing someone over a video call, yes, it might be off-puttingly alienating to some students, and it said in that Guardian article Julia referred to that it felt a bit like they were watching telly, and that was one of the reasons why they couldn't engage with the lecturers. But at the same time, if it really did feel like you were sitting in a boardroom and they were all in your house, that augmented reality element is quite scary. Like, you'd rather it feels like telly than not being able to separate what's real and what isn't anymore.
I suppose perhaps, but I'm not sure about that really. I think that obviously there is an element of it's slightly alien technology, but I think that we are sort of talking about engaging with students who have grown up with, technology, grown up with video calls, and who will probably be a lot more, I guess, sort of open-minded towards this sort of idea and sort of like accept it. And I mean, there is also, it's that there is an element of it being a novelty which will probably wear off, and attendance numbers may well not be sort of like hugely spiked in the long term because of this. But I do think that there is an element of wanting to try something different, and I think that from the perspective of the lecturers doing it, I mean, I think the thrust of it is that while it is still in the stage of being this sort of slightly new idea, that it's going to be used for more guest speakers, perhaps sort of like more notable names from particular industries being brought in to speak to students. And so there is sort of like that sort of, for the time being, it's that sort of special event element of it, which I think you can probably get across a little bit more with this technology than say a regular video call. Okay. I mean, Julia, Emma obviously thinks it's what young people want. I wonder if there's an element of this being what 40 and 50 and 60-year-old academics think young people want, and whether a 17-year-old making a university application is really going to be thinking, oh yes, Loughborough, because they've got holograms.
Yeah, I do fully agree. I was trying to find some information on what it is that students actually want, which is very hard to do because obviously every university puts out their idea of what they think students want. But just thinking from my own experience, in my final year, I had about 4 contact hours a week. And I would rather that money was being invested into academic salaries and staff so that they have the time, resource to be able to work more closely with their students and support them in ways that I think most academics working in a university setting do want to. Things like, even just buying your books at the start of term, the costs like that, where you think actually what would make a really measurable difference to a student life. And obviously it's fun for a bit of novelty, but if it was for me and there was a whole course of hologram lecturers, I'd pick the one that maybe most interested me and head there. But chances are it would probably be recorded and I could watch it back anyway. So I'd probably just do that.
Well, the watching it back point is interesting, Mariana, isn't it? Because the point about this technology is that once it's filmed, it's taped. And so, yes, it could be broadcast live from anywhere in the world, but also it could then be rebroadcast for the next 100 years. In other words, you could eventually end up watching an academic giving you a lecture who is now dead. Is that an appealing concept?
I wonder if it might be appealing as a sort of resource for the students or for people, students who do more archival or historical research. But I was also wondering, I think during the pandemic, there was quite a big emphasis on asking lecturers to record all their presentations and so on. And then some universities were actually reusing this material. And so this made some of the lecturers quite anxious or skeptical about providing it, because then what use is it for them to continue teaching this, to teach the same lecture every year? How do you sort of improve on it if you always have this one that was recorded 100 years ago? And I also feel like the headlines from the Guardian article were a bit sketchy in that they were like, soon we'll be able to have Einstein teach us about relativity in a hologram format. And there's just so many issues with like moral responsibility and the legacies of people and sort of like what their messages mean in current contexts, especially in my field in international relations. You don't sort of want the founders of the discipline who were working in a context of all the countries or the main countries were empires to sort of be teaching students now how to manage their territories, or what does peace involve when you have colonies. There's just so much more to it when you start talking about the past. I think I feel a little bit like the episode when we talked about drones as taxis in New York, where I just don't necessarily feel like I have a good grasp of how far the technology has come. And I think it's because it evolved so quickly in the last few years.
I think the thing that seems obvious, Emma, regardless of what other applications this technology might have, and we've seen this, with the ABBA show in London, is the place where it obviously works is in museums and exhibitions and in theme parks and amusements and attractions. It's an eye-catching thing. Might not be something you want to see every day, but something that, as a way of communicating things that would otherwise be written up on dry panels on the wall, or, you'd have to, in the case of ABBA, have a tribute band. It's a nice way to do something that wouldn't have been possible before, and it's getting ever cheaper. $60,000 for one of these boxes at the moment. And, so in 5 years' time, presumably that's going to be $5,000. Every local museum will be able to have one of these.
Yeah, exactly. It's the sort of thing, because as Mariana says, technology moves so quickly that it seems so alien and strange now, and in 5 years' time, you may well see them everywhere. I mean, there's a hologram zoo which has opened in Brisbane, Australia. There's plans for a hologram aquarium at Bill Gates' hotel in the Maldives. And as you say, ABBA Voyage, it's the latest in a number of holographic performances by music artists. And I think that is the way that it will go. I mean, Loughborough have said that they're planning to roll out these hologram lectures into its main curriculum from 2025, which, I mean, does seem fairly close at hand next year. But I think that this is the kind of thing that, whilst might seem sort of a bit strange now, is the kind of thing that in 5 years' time will become more mainstream. And I mean, it's not an entirely new suggestion from universities to do lectures and sort of guest speakers in holograms. The BBC had an article in 2018 about Imperial College London doing a test event with hologram lecturers. So it's something that has been in the works more for a longer time than it might appear here. And I suppose that in the end, this probably isn't the kind of thing that is going to, definitely sort of bring students into a particular course, because there are, as Julia says, there are other factors which are probably more important to students. But there's also the element that perhaps in 5 years' time, it won't matter which university course you do or which university you go to, you'll probably have some kind of lecture or talk done via hologram.
Have any of you been to ABBA Voyage, by the way?
Yes, twice.
Julia, yes. It's good, isn't it?
I love it.
Did you go to the loo? Because if you go to the loo, you see them slightly from the side when you re-enter the stadium.
Yes.
It did ruin it for me. Agnetha suddenly looked very flat. From the front, incredible.
I didn't realise that the band was real people for a while. I was like, wow, that drummer, they've done a great job.
Well, I think the combination of reality and virtual reality is what makes it, though, isn't it? And it's the same with this, I guess. Like, if you're in a lecture hall, what's the equivalent of the live band? It could just feel a bit flat.
Yeah, I think it could feel really flat. And also, I think almost the more interesting aspect would be if it was a guest speaker who was dead. Like we were saying, wouldn't it be amazing if you could have like Shakespeare read you some of his own sonnets? Whereas actually, if it's a hologram of, say, Elton John talking about his career, I'd rather just see Elton John in the flesh.
Well, of course, Elton John will never die, so we don't need to worry about that. Okay, Emma, you're up next after this. Emma, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Forget the Oscars, give us the Razzies.
Award season doesn't just mean honoring the best of the best. The Razzies unveiled their annual nominations, which honor the worst of the year. Leading the nominations for the Razzies, or more formally known as the Golden Raspberry Awards, are Expendables 4, which earns 7 nominations, including Worst Picture. Another Worst Picture nominee is Shazam! Fury of the Gods, which the Razzies calls one of 2023's several comic book movies failing to save the superhero genre. Shazam! Also racked up nominations for Worst Actress for Helen Mirren, Worst Supporting Actress for Lucy Liu, and Worst Screenplay.
The Hollywood Reporter on Tuesday reacting to the nominations for this year's Razzies. Emma, what's a Razzie?
So a Razzie is it calls itself the ugly cousin of the Oscars. It's an award ceremony which takes place every year before the Oscars, awarding in categories as Worst Picture and Worst Actor. This week on Tuesday, the Oscar nominations were announced. The day before, on the Monday, the nominations for the 44th Razzies were revealed.
And like you say, 44 years this joke has been running. Why pick it out this year? What's significant about this event? It's obviously fun, but why are we talking about it?
So the Razzies, as I say, have been going on for 44 years. They were founded in 1981, basically as a joke by a Hollywood publicist at his Oscars party. They've sort of snowballed from there to become this event, which is taking place every year and sort of is held up as this counterpoint to the Oscars. But there is also an element to which people are starting to question whether the Razzies have had their time. And this year is particularly notable because it's the first time they've put an age limit on nominees. Previously, anyone of any age could be nominated. For this year, they have to be over the age of 18. Because last year, 12-year-old Ryan Kiva Armstrong was initially nominated for Worst Actress. There was a significant backlash to this. The Razzies accused of basically bullying children. They withdrew Ryan Kiva Armstrong from the nomination list and actually awarded themselves the Worst Actress award as a result. And then have from this year onwards say there will be an age limit on nominees.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it, Mariana? Because in a sense, the joke only works if you're punching up. You know, the sense, particularly from former child stars on social media, was you've just told a 12-year-old they're shit, and that's going to really get in their brain, and that's not cool.
Yeah, I suppose there's a very big emphasis on the context this year, right? So when the Razzies were first started coming around, there was no such thing as cancel culture, and so I think there's this way in which social media these days will sort of amplify a little bit more of the negative criticism in a way. And as much as they seem to have this sort of platform, so this is the first time I've heard about them. I'm enthralled. I don't know what this is, but I just thought it was incredible. So that they have 1,200 people voting on these awards, and so it's 6 times the size of the body that votes on the Golden Globes, and so it's made up from anyone who just pays $40 a year in dues. And so in a way it democratizes the process, but again it sort of seems to give a platform, which is the same thing with democracy being a double-edged sword. So it democratizes the process of giving an opinion, but it also gives a platform to something that tends to be quite negative. So I was firstly very much on the fence when I was reading about this, like, how dare you, like, more cancel culture, more toxic discourse online. And then I was reading the interview from the co-founders, and I think their spirit is quite different, and I think it will be a matter of whether they can, and even when they were talking about the nominations for the child actress, I think it's a matter of whether they can rephrase it or they can frame the awards as something more of a joke than this thing that very much fuels a little bit of the worst traits of social media these days.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a kind of whiff of 4chan about it, isn't there, Julia? You know, the kind of people that are involved in voting. And yet the initial spirit of the Razzies was kind of punky and anti-big studio, big money Hollywood, which a lot of people could get behind.
Yeah, that's very true. I guess the question is, how long is the joke funny for? And it does seem a little bit like the introduction of the age limit last year. The Razzies organisers initially put out on their social media channels a tweet that seemed to kind of make things worse and then had to retract it. It's just kind of these missteps that actually mean I think there's almost a sense that kind of like award ceremonies, like, how long are we going to continue doing this same format that feels incredibly dated, and people, you know, viewing numbers are down year on year, and yet we just continue going through it because that's how the Hollywood machine works and the industry works, and they all revolve around these events, and there's just so much in terms of the fashion, the PR that is built around having those kind of cornerstones. But even so, like, when you actually look at it and think, do we really need all of these ceremonies? And so I think anything that's set up like this, where it's kind of an annual event, it's worth always asking, should we still be doing this? Does this still make sense? I do think, actually, having looked at the nominations, it really made me laugh.
Who are the top contenders this year?
So Ana de Armas is up for 2 nominations, and Worst Actress, we've got Megan Fox, Salma Hayek, J-Lo and Helen Mirren, which is quite interesting. And then we also have Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. So this was to do with the copyright on A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh having come to an end. And so some creators turned the lovable bear into a horror character.
Yes, we talked about it a few weeks ago when Steamboat Willie's copyright came up.
Yeah, perfect. Well, there you go. And it's up for worst screenplay, worst rip-off, worst picture, but also Winnie the Pooh and Piglet are nominated for worst on-screen couple.
Worst rip-off? Really... Surely that's best rip-off.
True.
Do you have any favourites, Emma? Who do you think is going to sweep the board?
So the nominees for worst picture this year, I've seen, unfortunately, 3 of them: Exorcist Believer, Meg 2: The Trench, and Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Shazam! Fury of the Gods I watched on a plane to Australia, and it made me want to leave the theatre. It's just it was terrible, and I think that there is an element of it's quite good that these big Hollywood flops are being sort of held up, because obviously they're taking place the day before the Oscars, which is Hollywood very much celebrating itself. So I think that there is definitely room for a counterpoint in which sort of it's pointing out these occasions in which Hollywood has very much slipped up. There's also the fact that, given that these films were for the most part box office flops, that people will not be aware of that these films even existed until they were nominated by the Razzies, and then people were like, really, they did it?
But the joke only works, I think, when it is the films that Hollywood spent a lot of money on. I'm not sure the Winnie the Pooh thing works, because again, it's not punching down, but it's like the point of making the Winnie the Pooh copyright infringement horror slasher flick is in itself an anti-establishment indie jokes on everyone else type move, right? Whereas making another crap Expendables film, that feels like fair game.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that the Razzies generally do get right. They very rarely nominate sort of no budget indie films. They generally nominate films that have got Hollywood backing, which includes Sylvester Stallone, who's been nominated for Worst Supporting Actor. It's his 16th nomination, and he's had 10 previous wins, which is quite extraordinary. And I think does also indicate that the Razzies generally set their sights on Hollywood. There are a couple of exceptions, and a couple of interesting exceptions. They have attempted to some extent to keep up with recent times. For example, in 2017, Dinesh D'Souza's conspiracy theory documentary about Hillary Clinton won 3 Razzies, and it was basically a case of the Razzies condemning a conspiracy theory documentary amid sort of, the Trump era politics. So they have made some attempts to update with the times, but there is also, an element in which it is still poking at Hollywood after 44 years.
Mariana.
I'm very sad this time you haven't asked me to predict anything. You just want me to talk about war. It's very high stakes. I also don't have any predictions for this, but I just have a question. So I saw that Salma Hayek and Channing Tatum are up for the worst screen couple. And if anyone has watched Magic Mike, I haven't watched this sequel, but how can you mess up Magic Mike? It's I find it incredibly hard to mess up that format as it is. So I just have questions. If you guys have watched, what is going on?
I don't know, but I'm enjoying the incredulity. I think what's fun, Julia, is when it is actors who have been Oscar nominated in the past themselves who actually win. And some of them do turn up, don't they?
Yeah, some people take it really well. Dwayne Johnson posted a video accepting his award for the 2017 Baywatch remake. And also a filmmaker, Paul Verhoeven, spoke about winning 6 awards in the 1996 ceremony that he actually went along to. And initially, when they kind of showed clips of his film, people in the audience were kind of laughing and being mean. And then realising that he was in the audience, actually, he was saying that it was an incredible atmosphere. People just shifted, and there was applause, there was cheering, and people were just like, yeah, if you're up for getting in on the joke, then we'll respect that.
Halle Berry actually pastiched her own Oscar acceptance speech in her Razzie acceptance speech, which I think is a baller move.
That's great.
Emma, you seem to be the most learned of our correspondents today when it comes to terrible films. If you had to give the Golden Razzie, what would it be? Worst film of the decade?
Well, honestly, I'm astonished that among the worst picture nominees this year that Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania isn't in there. I had the misfortune of going to see that Marvel effort last year. It was the worst sort of excesses of nonsensical storyline, terrible CG. That would have been my pick for this year, absolutely. Yeah, well, go tell it to their face. That's it for this week. My thanks to Emma, Julia, Mariana, who'd never be nominated for anything apart from awards, celebrating excellence in podcasting. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tapping follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer was Ollie Pitt at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.